Rich, how you doing?
Hey Mark, I'm doing great, doing fantastic.
Good. It's been a week, so I guess it's back to our podcast here. This is episode 5, and I know that there have been a number of questions that we've been getting, requests regarding the topic, and I think we'll be talking about the why, behind today's airway epidemic. I mean, why? It's always the question, why is it so quote unquote pandemic, right?
Right.
So look forward to that. And
Yeah, so do I. So do I. When I was looking on YouTube for this presentation from this, it was like a TED Talk, and I can't find the darn thing for the life of me. I've looked everywhere. I had AI help me out, and we just couldn't find it. And it's a dentist that talks about what's going on in the world that's causing all these airway problems. And I thought it was a really nice, uh, TED talk. But I thought, why don't we kind of cover the same topics in one of our podcasts? So let's do that
sure.
today. And I think that so our patients and our colleagues in the health community can better understand what's happening. When we look at the face of modern man, woman, person today, we have this expectation for a certain shape, a certain jawline, a certain nose size, and the variability of noses is fully accepted. The variability of jawlines and facial shapes, it's just so accepted. It's almost like that's the way it was supposed to be. We have people that are brachycephalic and kind of squished this way with the mesos, the middle ones, and the taller dolichofacial types. We even have, in dental school, the shape of the teeth that we were given to work on to practice all of our
And the Takodon.
dentistry, that shape. And it's just, pictures I was thinking of like Lady Liberty on our old gold coins from 100 years ago, this profile and stuff. It's become such a big part of culture that it's like considered normal, but in actuality, Mark, it may be normal, but it's probably not the way we would have developed if things had been different. And
Right.
that to me is so fascinating. And I wanted to get into a little bit about, or maybe get into a lot. We'll see how much time we have. But I mean, what's going on? Why are so many patients different? Why do so many people have crowded teeth? Why do so many people have bad bites? Why do so many people have faces that are longer than maybe they were 500 years ago? I mean, how in the world could that have happened? I mean, we're humans. We're
Right.
genetically not different than we were. We are genetically no different today than we were, I would guess, what, a million years ago? I don't know. I mean, how maybe
Certainly,
500,000? I don't know. You probably have that information, but our genetics are the same. So what's going on?
pretty much. So, what's happened is that, we've, uh, you know, w- we've gone through professional education, right? And
Right.
and
Sure.
basically given us a storyline, and where genetics pretty much rule the day. And we know that, these base pairs that make up our DNA um, call for our heredity. The problem is that the classic Mendelian heredity, which works just fine if you're looking at green peas, um, tends
Wait.
not
What did you say? Green, like
green
peas.
peas. So Mendel
Okay.
actually,
Right.
if you remember, he actually he did those experiments with peas in a
Yeah.
pod, and
Vegetables.
so he was able to kind of but for more complex creatures, what we found out after 2003. So in 2001, the Human Genome Project was initiated. In 2003, was completed at a cost of $1 billion. That's in 2003 dollars in the year 2003. And it was very interesting because what was believed was that we would have the answers to all the genetic problems that we would be able to figure out, like disease. And uh, as it turns out, we had very few answers.
Hmm.
The only things we had answers to were really truly genetic problem misspellings, if you will, trisomy 13, right? And other conditions. And it really makes sense when you think about it. We had this cadre of very, very intelligent molecular biologists, scientists, chemists that were looking at what represents 3 to 5% by molecular weight of the chromosome. It was the DNA. That's what the focus was on the base pairs. They were mapping alleles. They were mapping out, how proteins were being expressed. But what they forgot or what they ignored was everything that surrounded the DNA, that DNA spiral, which was the chromatin. So DNA is a double helix, as we know, and it's wrapped in what are called histone proteins, and it's wrapped and organized. And if you start looking at how it's organized, it's amazing how it's organized. It's all wrapped up. And what happens is if you have an environmental input, say, let's just say it's a food that's highly methylated. Those methyl um, um, functional groups will attach to different aspects of the chromatin, and they cause the histone proteins to unravel. And so then now you get the DNA that now can express. So that's upregulating a suite of alleles. The other thing is these alleles rarely really behave alone. It's usually in multiple alleles. So what was found was that it wasn't so much um, the base pairs as much as the expression, upregulation and downregulation. So if you look at homozygotic twins, identical twins, base pair to base pair, and you
Right.
separate them at birth, and one goes off with one family member and one comes back, and they come back 20 years later, and you look at them, they look very different. One that
Right.
exercised and ate a certain way, the other one that smoked and sat around. They look very different. And
Right.
yet the base pairs are exactly the same. And so if you keep them in the same exact environment, they look identical. They hang out, they look identical until. So the point is that it's not so much the genetics, the base pair, it's the expression, upregulation and downregulation. And so that's really been well documented. Now let's just look at that more globally. If you take an entire species, where yes, Homo sapien has a very, very specific genome, if you will, but
Mhm.
the environment in which it is in will express differently. So if you're in the Serengeti, it's a very different environment than if you're in Norrbotten, Sweden, right? So less sun. And so you see these phenotype differences, and yet we're all Homo sapiens, the family of Homo sapiens, the amount of melanization, the expression of the amount of melanization, the height. Like you're in Africa, you get more vitamin D, you're going to be taller. But then you're up in the north and you wear a lot of clothes, you have less vitamin D. There are all kinds of factors. In fact, it would be considered to be a stochastic event. Stochastic meaning that it's all about probabilities, kind of like the weather. We can predict the weather, but there's so many different factors, as they say, the butterfly that flaps its wings in South America, that event has this cascade of events, if you will, that can have a global effect. I mean, that's the what's called the butterfly effect, right?
Right.
And it's stochastic. So when you're born into a family, there are a lot of different inputs, the tradition of how the foods you eat and how you're raised. And so within a family, usually those environments are very similar. And yes, we're going to look like our parents to some extent, right? But people will tend to say, well, yeah, my grandfather snored and he had sleep apnea, and my dad and my uncle, and of course my brother. So therefore it's genetic, right? So it's very
Right.
easy to say that it's genetic. As it turns out, I can't cite a particular paper or whatever, but in general, the understanding now in molecular biology is that um, genetics is about 20% of the game, and 80% is the input, the genic inputs that express how the individual forms. As if we're looking at ontogeny and phylogeny, how we're born, growth and development, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's what's confusing if we step back, is how we were educated in healthcare. Orthodontics specifically has hung their hat for so long on the genetic philosophy that you can't change the mandible. It's genetically predetermined, so therefore we just have to live with it. And so I think that's kind of what's created this confusion where, well, it didn't grow enough, high angle, there's crowding. Let's just at least fix it and get the teeth straight. So we were just really focused on the arrangement of these structures, really not asking the questions of, well, why is there crowding to begin with? And by the way, this has also happened in medicine. So if we look at, for example, a C-section birth versus a natural birth, the vaginal birth, right? The way we were born for millennia, where yes, perhaps the death rate, birth rate, or death rate of being born was really high in, say, the medieval period, but thanks
Right.
to modern medicine, it's become a relatively rare situation. And in fact, we have preemies that are born at 30 weeks that you can incubate and finish the growth process, right? So we're that sophisticated. But if you look at the difference between a natural birth and a C-section, we know that the C-section baby is going to have a lot more problems because, interestingly, we wouldn't think of this as the baby it goes through the birth canal. That baby who's born is covered with mother's flora. And that flora, as it turns out, turns on a lot of switches. Who would have known?
Mm.
Nature's very complex, but it turns on a lot of immunology switches that C-section baby that's born under sterile conditions doesn't have. So they'll have a higher incidence of allergies and a lot of different problems. And if they're born at 37 weeks because it's convenient, because Doc is going to go on a golf vacation, let's
Mm.
just, plan it. Let's not worry about, you know, having a 48-hour labor. Let's just do it. That's now considered an ethical in most hospitals. The other thing is that was unpopular back in the 80s is nursing, breastfeeding. I mean, who would have known? I don't want to, you know, breastfeed. I got to go back to work. It's not a right or a wrong, but as it turns out, that's a huge factor because the way we were born and fed for millennia was a certain way. The infant would sit on mom's lap, and as that baby was nursing, it was more effortful, and that effortful feeding actually was nature's natural palatal expansion, and it would distract the intermaxillary suture, the zygomatical maxillaries, all these sutures. When a baby's born and you feel the head with all the fontanelles and the soft spots, they're
Right.
membranes, right? So what happens is, we're the only mammal that, because of our large brain, that is so dependent on mom. Giraffe, it's born, a mammal, it's out in the African plains. It's up and running at 20 meters, a minute. I mean, super fast, like faster than any human within like the first hour of its life to escape, whatever it is. But the head is not as big in that birth canal. For us, the brain is just barely developed to come out of that birth canal, and the skull comes out and is compressed. So you come out as a cone head, and then those 22 bones that make the head, they start settling, and then they ossify over the following 2 years. In very progressive hospitals around the United States now, you have osteopaths that go into labor delivery and they take that baby and they lay their hands and then they separate those bones because they can kind of get bunched up, and that could create some problems. Um, a baby that is on its back for way too long ends up having deformational plagiocephaly. The head becomes flat, and that creates a cascade of events of all the other bones. The temporal bones start flexing, and so you have problems. So nature, the exposure of that organism in that environment has a huge effect. It has nothing to do or very little to do with the base pairs of the DNA. The DNA already did its job. Now it's all about which things do we turn on and turn off. And so I think that's a confusion for a lot of providers, is that we were given the basic sciences and all this evidence was a priori. Okay, of course, you're going to look like mom or dad. But I think we lost out on a lot of the nuances. And it wasn't again till the Human Genome Project, where all these very intelligent people realized we have to start looking at the chromatin. And so that's given rise to a whole pharmaceutical industry now that focuses on biologics. There are fewer side effects for biologics because it's working with the body. Whereas a pharmacological intervention all have side effects because we don't know all the molecular consequences of, giving more creatine or whatever that might upregulate something to address some symptom, but then there's some side effects. So as we start having more of these biologics, we're really understanding molecular biology in more and more sophisticated manners. We're starting to be able to deal with these cancers, turning off oncogenes instead of just irradiating good cells and all the things that we used to do before. So I guess that's a long-winded narrative, if you will, on um, genetics, DNA, and how we were trained. And I think it's created a lot of confusion for us at chairside. And our whole population's been trained by the guy in the white coat saying it's just a genetic problem. And
Right.
it may
Uh,
be,
yeah.
but how about all the other factors that may be able to overcome some of those genetic compensations, if you will?
What do you think we could be doing
Mm.
in modern medicine at age 0 or even before to improve the optimal development of our children? Uh, what needs to happen? I mean, obviously we have interventions at various stages of life. When the patients come to us, we recognize how to diagnose them, how to make a treatment plan that best suits the condition in which they arrive at our office, from very young age all the way to our senior patients, or even, yeah, our senior patients that may have really severe issues. But my my I guess my question just restated is, gosh, it just seems like we can pretty easily undo some of these things with some knowledge. And if I were a young family, starting a young family, I would want to know everything I can about this so that I can select the best healthcare providers, the best birthing situation, the best food, the diet, how do I want to hold my baby? Um, do I want to take off time from work and carry them around like they used to do in the fields? Do I need to worry about soft food so they won't choke? And I don't, I don't really have a really clear guideline, or is there a book, or is there something that you would suggest for, like, anyone that's starting a family should
Yeah,
be thinking about this, so that, my gosh, look at the horrors of all the airway issues. I mean, this is a life or death situation. And when people hear me say that, they're like, oh, come on. I go, no, no, no. What do you think? You know, infants are dying. Kids are getting diseases, allergies that most like could possibly be avoided. I mean, Mark, when we were growing up, we could eat peanuts and nobody was allergic to anything. We could eat everything. We ran around outside all the time and bare feet and just drank from hoses of our neighbor's house and when we were thirsty, you know? And today, my goodness, it's got to be purified bottled water for my baby and this and that. And it used to be you're allergic to peanuts. If you ate them, you could be allergic. But now it's like I'm hearing stories of the kid eating the peanuts could be 15 feet away from the other kid, and the other kid has an allergic reaction. I mean, what is this? This just seems insanity. I
it
mean, it
is
doesn't
crazy.
sound like the trajectory of humankind is going in the right way. What can we
It,
tell the young? What can we tell
no,
a young
you're right.
family, right? I mean, what can we tell a
No,
young
it's
family?
crazy. I at the time, my son, when he was in middle school, one of his classmates got suspended because he threw a peanut across the class to get ping one of his buddies
Wow.
who, quote unquote, had peanut allergies. He got suspended. It was almost like he shot the guy. And the
Wow.
mom got all freaked out because, the kid had been in the ER from severe allergies. So it's not a laughing matter. And so you're
No.
asking the right questions. So here's the way I look at it. And we talk about this in detail in the AMR, in the Airway Mini Residency. I've spent a lot of time, and in the past, what's happened in the Airway Mini Residency that Barry and I used to teach. It used to be like, it was like 100 hours. We've now distilled it down to where we're just kind of recording some of the lectures that people can hear. They get really deeply into a lot of these things, these questions
Right.
that are important because you really have to understand it. But the provider at the end of the day wants to find out, what do I do? It's like, what impression material do I use? What gauge needle do I use? They just want the answers to be able to do it. And so they end up losing out in that deep knowledge. And I think with Airway, you're best off if you really do have a deep understanding. So I'll tell you a little bit about what how to think about it. And what we talk about in the Airway Mini Residency is if you think about um, and we start off talking about evolutionary medicine and how we evolved from tetrapads to biped locomotion using our hands, how our brain develops, called the Great Leap Forward. And we went from hunters and gatherers that we lived prior to 70,000 years ago in small groups of 7 to 10. And, you'd have 4 or 5 men that would go out on a 3-day hunt to run down a gazelle while the females would be hunting for tubers and they'd be getting in the dirt and they'd be introducing the bacteria from the earth into the flora, part of the immune system that we evolved through. And in our modern living, we've sterilized everything. We've really changed the environment without an appreciation for what it's done to us. Like I said, C-section versus a natural delivery. But think about what was nature's plan. So natural childbirth to be born a certain way. Um, and it doesn't mean that you have to be born that way. You just have to understand what the consequences may be. Like if you're a C-section, now in some hospitals, they will take some of mom's flora and rub it over the baby. So that's an example. Another is we always nursed. So think about it. If you're looking at that mom in the Congo or in deep in the Amazon, the baby's born, and when the baby feeds, she's putting the baby on the lap, and the baby is nursing on mom's breast, upright. And when the baby's done, mom papooses that baby. So she goes around and the baby's on her back. Well, let's contrast it to what we're doing today in modern living. We take the baby and we put him on the back and we give him a bottle. And so what happens is we're materially changing what are called central pattern generators, the neurology of swallowing, which is integrated to breathing. So the baby now has to negotiate almost being drowned. They're feeding and at the same time not choking. And there's no effort. So the muscles become weak. So when a baby's nursing, the effortful effect of that strains the sutures of the face that upregulates bone formation. So you get that Paleolithic face. When mom finishes or is ready to wean the baby, she would take the food, like let's say it's a cantaloupe, and maybe she pre-chews it a little bit and then introduces it to the baby. So the baby gets something that is not mush, like goo, feels it, starts developing an understanding of textures, and starts changing the way it chews and swallows. And so that's programs the infantile cardinal reflexes that they're born with and starts developing what is called the mature swallow, which is driven by the fifth cranial nerve. And so there's a lot of neurology we get into in the airway mini residency that talks about that. But that starts getting the child to chew a certain way that also strains the face. The other is instead of papoosing the baby, you put the baby on the back and you got to give them tummy time too. You got to get them so that their head is very malleable. You see these kids in helmets now, right? They're trying to get them formed, but you have to understand what nature intended. So those are just a few factors. And so, like my wife was unable to nurse our son. It's okay. You can't feel guilty about it. But as a provider, you have to understand, no problem. But these are some things you could do to obviate the consequences of that. Try eliminating non-nutritive sucking. If you're going to get a bottle, get the newer bottles that are that more like a breast that requires more effort. Um, Stay away from sippy cups and straws. Give them a glass to develop, to learn how to swallow. And so, what do we do with the toddler? And we put them in their high chair and we give them all these things so it's not so inconvenient to us that they're throwing it because they don't have the coordination. It spills all over for the third time. And mom's tired and she doesn't want to pick up another spill, right? It's not a right or wrong. But the reality is that baby is feeling the food, it's sensing it, it's developing a lot of neurology. You want it to play with it and feel it and put it in there. The problem with our kids now is they have just soft food, so they have texture aversion. It's very effortless. So they get these very weak muscles, hypotonicity, long faces, adenoid faces that come along with the breathing and sleep problems that we talk about.
Hmm.
And so if you understand what the natural plan is, I always say, just have patience, let the kid make a mess in that corner. They're going to get it, and eventually they're going to be okay. So if you don't want to do that, that's fine. Then maybe you use an infant trainer. Um, get them in to a sleep and language pathologist or myofunctional therapist to repattern. So we have solutions, but don't wait till it becomes a big problem that's presents as an asthma that you have no idea is related to this problem that we started with during growth and development. Things that we get deeply into in the airway mini residency. So I have parents where I'm treating the kids that they ask me about their 6 month old, and I'll look at them and I ask them questions. Well, what was the birth? Tell me a little bit about the birth history. C-section, suction cups, induced with Pitocin. Was the kid able to latch right away? No, no, it hurt and they were colicky. Well, they couldn't get a latch. So you got to look at that risk factor. What was the APGAR score? How long were they in the NICU? If they were in the NICU a day, 2 days, 3 days, very high probability they're going to have sleep disordered breathing. Very high probability because they're already way behind the benchmarks. So this is where it starts, Rich. And we talk about in the mini residency, the airway timeline from birth all the way to end stage diagnosis of the old man that's on the CPAP. And more often than not, that old man that's on the CPAP, if you look at their history and you talk to them, you could go back decades to find out that they've had these problems. It's just that no one's asking those questions. It's
Wow.
not so much a genetic condition. You start asking and go, yeah, I slept on my stomach and I used to pee in the bed till I was 11 and they thought I was nervous. They put me in at a tutor, and it wasn't until I was a junior in high school that I turned the corner. And again, the environment came in and was able to get them back up and running. And so this is what is at stake here. It's not just the teeth alignment. It's really all these things that get our adult patients as dentists that are very sick with erosion and fractured teeth and crowding and reflux that we're now trying to restore, temporomandibular joint problems. We're just fixing parts of a system that have a history from function, and it's not a genetic condition. And so that's the sophisticated part of understanding what we're calling airway that has to do with the facial skeleton that we know about. But what happens is we go through our training and we just want to learn about how to fix these teeth and how to do veneers and how to make the teeth straight, display, proportion, arc of smile, and yet they're narrow, right? I mean, you're seeing this. So for me, I'm looking at someone who says, I have a big nose, it's a hook, and I don't like my smile. And so I'll talk to them about facially driven outcomes. And typically when you look at that person who has a big nose, it's not so much that they have a big nose. It's that they have hypoplastic maxilla. So facial balance is distorted. And yes, you may say there's a genetic condition because they're from south of Italy, Sicilian, that you have a certain, genetic display, right? But some express it more than others. And actually, if you look at within that population, the very handsome individuals, they have better, same size nose, but they have better expression of high cheekbones and facial display, straight profiles. When Ed Angle came around and came up with class one, class two, class three, it didn't exist 500 years before, 1,000 years before. Robert Corcini wrote that book explaining malocclusion as an anthropologist to the orthodontists. It just didn't work. It didn't. You had skulls like this. There's a 100-year-old female um, that we got in dental school. It's a real life skull, 32 teeth, no crowding, 41 millimeter intermolar width. This is just the way we were. And in India, from which this came from, you can't get them anymore. They were more Paleolithic.
Yep.
They actually lived more the way the DNA called for our species to be. And what's happened, as Daniel Lieberman writes about in his book, The Story of the Human Body, Robert Sapolsky, they talk about we've radically changed our environment in a nanosecond from a geologic point of view, literally in a nanosecond. We evolved over millions of years, certainly hundreds of thousands of years. And if you look at Homo sapien, 70,000 years plus, in that period of time, all these problems have expressed really in less than 500 years. And it's accelerated really even in the last 50 to 75 years.
I think it's so fascinating. I was talking to one of my students about this, and she's from India. And I said, do you see a difference in the facial structure of your your countrymen, your fellow citizens of your state in India, from the farming communities versus the city dwellers? And she said, absolutely, their faces are very different. And we just sort of equate that face with, oh, they're rural, they're farmers, they're not modernized. And so our faces are these elongated faces that need significant orthodontics and crowding and all of the, and they even get rhinoplasties, all types of things to adjust and beautify. When in fact, I said, so the people that are in the countryside that have been in that same culture has been virtually unchanged in hundreds of years, hundreds and hundreds of years. They look entirely different, and so it's still here. I mean, we can find cultures within our world that have not changed much in the last 500 years. They're still doing the things they used to. I've been through India, and the mom is in the field planting rice, and the baby's on a papoose, and baby's hungry. They swing it around, or boom, they keep on working, and the baby's suckling, and the whole thing. I thought, wow, that's so fascinating. I mean, there's a living example in our world today where you don't have these deleterious growth patterns that come from
So Rich,
all
just
time.
so Weston Price, who was a dentist, right? If you're
Right.
familiar with his work, he actually looked and went to New Guinea and he saw all these things, and he found that those generations that left and went to the West very, very quickly started having crowding and tooth decay, these problems. Let's just go back to Pottinger. If you know the story of Pottinger's kittens, Pottinger's cats, you could look it up. So
Right.
what he
Right.
did is
Tell
during
everybody
World War
about
II,
that.
what's that?
Tell everyone listening about that. This really is very
Yeah, so
fascinating.
what is very interesting because it's a microcosm of exactly this problem that we're dealing with. Okay,
Right.
but it's in with cats. So you could fact check me on the exact details. I may be off on some of the exact details, but
Well,
the
just
spirit
the
of the
gist.
story is there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it was like around World War II or somewhere around there. He got these kittens and took them in that were kind of stray, and he started feeding them like whatever human food. First it was like milk, and then he would give them like processed food. And he noticed like the next generation, the kittens were not quite as robust as their parents. They were, but he nurtured them and everything, kept on feeding them the same thing. By I think it was the fourth or fifth generation, they were unable to uh, duplicate. They were unable to have, they became sterile.
Right.
And he saw them getting sicker with more periodontal disease, and they lived shorter lives.
Yep.
And then he said, I'm going to change it. So he started changing their diet back to their natural cat diet. It took him 7 generations to get him back to where they were themselves, to where they were healthy. So we'll go back to 2 episodes ago podcast where you and Barry were talking about Wally, or
Wally, the movie, yeah, the
the
Pixar film.
movie,
Yeah.
and so it's not going to be in our generation that we're probably going to be able to get these kids with these peanut allergies to reverse it. But
Mhm.
it will probably take a few generations to get it back once we figure this out. Just using those anecdotes of those stories
Right.
of, because here's the thing, when we talk about genetics, there's the epigenetic, what's called these methylation patterns.
Right.
So there's what's called uh, pre-transcriptional methylation and post-translational acetylation. These are 2 epigenetic changes or influences on our human genome that affect the regulation. And those methylation patterns have been studied and can be carried on for up to 100 years. So if you look at the history of the Dutch winter harvest of during World War II, you look at these different populations that were isolated, and epigenetically, it ended up affecting up to 100 years later, whether it was obesity or whatever trait. In fact, you could probably look up on the internet. In New Guinea, there's a big project that what's happened is with the Aborigines that were one of the last, along with deep in the Amazon, these human populations were very Paleolithic and unaltered by the West, that in the last 100 years, these populations where the West has gone in there and has influenced them, giving them a Coca-Cola or whatever as an example, they're dying off. Their lineage is dying off, and they're getting sicker and sicker. So there are these projects of going in there and trying to keep them isolated to maintain their lifestyle, to make sure that that lineage does not die.
Let's go
So,
back a second. Go back for just a minute because you mentioned with the methylation, the epigenetic changes of the gene of, our genetics. That would, and you're talking about generations, then there is a hereditary factor. So, right? I mean,
well,
so
it's heredity in an epigenetic definition.
right.
So heredity is normally looking at the chromosome changed, um, not so much the methylation pattern. So that's the point I'm making,
Hmm.
is that it's not the classic Mendelian allele that
Right.
you can actually definitely you can actually breed into a species for
Right.
sure.
Right.
Um, that's very different than looking at acetylation and methylation patterns. So let me give you an example. If you look at the agouti gene, there have been these studies, and you could look this up on YouTube or
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
But the agouti mouse, they get these mice, and they have these 2 identical mices, base pair to base pair. And one group, they turn on what's called the agouti gene, Agouti,
Right.
and they feed the mouse a certain food that's highly methylated, that upregulates a different suite of alleles, where that mouse cohort goes from a wild type brown to blonde, become obese, and they become sick. And the only difference between those base pair identical populations is the methylated food.
Right.
Essentially, those mice become fat, big, blonde, and they get sick. And it's just by turning on one gene. It's called the agouti. Look it up. So
Right.
that's classically would be considered an epigenetic input. So I'm just making the distinction. Yes, you can inherit a methylation pattern, but that's different than inheriting like a homozygous inheritance, base pair inheritance. So you got
So
to get
how,
into molecular biology where
right, right.
we're looking at.
So, okay, okay. So how do you distinguish between, I mean, how do you answer the following question? Yeah, he looks just like his father. He's got a long face. He's got a gummy smile. He's always had problems breathing, just like his dad.
Mhm.
Just like his dad.
Yeah.
Now, his dad clearly was raised by the grandparents of this child, and maybe in a different part of the country, even, and a different time completely. And yet the kid is a splitting image of the father with this problem. And you want to try to explain this to a parent. Where do you usually go with that?
So I would
Make
okay.
that clear.
So if we were to answer that question scientifically, what I would say is I would go back to that lineage, back to the tree, to as far to where it was the purest phenotype expression that was more Paleolithic, just like Pottinger's kittens.
Right.
You can go back and see it. In fact, there was a study that was done, and this was in the plastic surgery literature some years ago. And what they did is they took these black and white photographs of what would be considered the sex symbols back in the 50s and the 60s, the Cary Grants, the Humphrey Bogarts, the Clark Gables.
Yeah,
They had the more Paleolithic face. That wasn't that long ago, right?
that's right.
And then they took matched sex symbols, the Will Smiths and the Johnny Depps with more rounder faces, and they took a black and white and they went, and this was in a developing country out in the countryside where they took whatever 100 females that were in sexual prime, if you will, looking for mates or whatever, and they gave them these pictures to look at and say, which ones do you feel are more attractive? And hands down, I can't tell you exactly the statistics, but it was like well into the high 90s that who they chose were all the older actors that were more Paleolithic for mates. So this article was actually looking at the science of beauty. What is it that we're really attracted to? Because that's associated with being healthier. They don't know that why. They just are more attracted. So that's hardwired into us attraction. We could get into the science of beauty and facials design and all these things from a
Right.
clinical point of view. In one of our podcasts, I think it's a fascinating thing.
Sure.
Um, um, what's attractive is not straight teeth. It's not big choppers like that movie something about Mary or whatever, where you
Right.
see, the big choppers, like, it's almost slapstick. That's funny that
Yeah.
this is what we do to our patients. And I'm like this cosmetic dentist that does all this, completely misses even the health implications. But in this study, isn't that interesting that they picked the more Paleolithic? So to answer your
Yes.
question, I
Very
would go back into the inheritance and say, where did it start changing? Because probably within families until very recently, not a right or a wrong, an is, populations were more homogenous in who you would marry into. And those environments were very similar the mother-in-law would say, this is the way you raise the baby, and this is the way you papoose them, and this is the way you feed them, and try this chicken stock, and this is the way we. And so within families, those environments really said, when I was growing up, I always kept the window open, and I was next to, and this is how I would sleep, and so those environmental inputs tend to be passed on, and so they're similar. But dad still kind of looks like, grandpa, but you start seeing these variations. And so, again, it's not just genetic, it's not just epigenetic, but epigenetics plays a much bigger role.
Mm.
I could tell you that, kind of tying this all in to a bow as we kind of round out this discussion.
Yeah.
If you look into George Catlin, who in the 1800s was a very well-known historian, attorney, who wrote the book, um, Close Your Mouth, Save Your Life. Well, very well known. And he lived amongst the Native Americans back in the turn of the century, in the 1800s. And the Native Americans used to call the European settlers and explorers that were coming over, they used to call them black mouths because their mouths were open. Exactly. And I mean, that was in the 1800s, right? It wasn't, and they all high cheekbones. If you look at the Buffalo nickel,
Oh yeah.
the profile of the
Right. Oh
Indian,
yeah.
straight
Yeah.
profile, big, it's
Yeah.
it's that was more of a Paleolithic face. Now, genetically, you could see people looked a certain way, but they were more Paleolithic. So within populations, if you're Swedish, if you're Asian, if you look at the Paleolithic version of that population, we all kind of looked the same. We didn't have crowding. We had straight profiles. And if you look at the Japanese going back dynasties in the Chinese, but Japanese specifically in the burial sites, they've done these studies, hundreds of years, where the imperial families actually, the skulls look sicker and sicker and sicker. And it's the
Mhm.
poor that were the healthier ones. This
Wow.
also happened in Europe.
Wow.
The poor that ate the mutton, that the worked to eat the mutton, whereas the king, they ate the very soft foods. They ended up ironically being sicker, right? So
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. It's not like I want to go to mutton, but just understand there are
Right.
things that we as providers
Right. Right.
can change the expression, if you will, of
Mm-hmm.
how that face grows. And that's what I do for my young moms. And in the therapies that we do, is we're not just doing the intervention, we're also talking about the things that they need to do. You know, you got to blow your nose, you got to do the neti pot, keep those lips together. In every family, I say, when you're in the family, every family's different. But when someone has their mouth open, there's like a call word. It might be pink elephant or whatever it is, because people don't want to be running around. The kid doesn't want to be here. Close your mouth, close your mouth. Mom just as she's passing by goes, pink elephant. That means your mouth is open. In other words, it's kind of like this consciousness of how we're supposed to be. And maybe the kid is congested. He goes and blows his nose because he'd be told, and now he can keep his mouth closed. So that's airway dentistry. It's really counseling on the things that the pediatricians are missing,
Right.
the pediatric dentists are missing, the
Right.
orthodontists, it's already too late because it's mixed dentition. And yet it portends to health and wellness and preventing a lot of problems. Less COVID infections, less flu, less missed days of school. And so it materially has an effect. So that's airway.
That's beautiful. And I was thinking I'm really looking forward to your text coming out, your book, because I know you go deeply into a lot of
Yes.
these questions. and provide clinicians with significant documentation, which we need, particularly when we're dealing with new things. Now, dentistry is, we're innovative, but to get us all on board with something, we really need the evidence and we need documentation that's from the most reputable sources. And we need a lot of a lot of repetition, excuse me. And that's kind of how we learn. And it's really interesting. I'm teaching a course this weekend, and I'm going through a technique from start to finish in the most detailed manner, carefully, slowly asking for to get it validated before I'm talking about the next step. And then it's time for them to all do the step. And invariably, it's a bell-shaped curve. There's a few that got it down cold. They'll finish it. They'll follow every step. A lot of people in the middle that are confused, and there are 3 or 4 people that can't do one thing. They can't do
And they're
one.
probably all very smart.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They just learn differently, and it's just the way it is. So, it's going to take some time. And I think the Airway mini residency, or AMR 3.0, that we have at our a center, that is going to be a mainstay, and is where you start. It's just mind-boggling what it will do for you to open up your brain. I mean, it's kind of reinvented me, Mark. I mean, I have to tell you, I'm we're both pretty seasoned professionals. We've done a lot of dentistry, and we've done a lot of learning, and we've been blessed with incredible mentors. We were in the right place at the right time a lot.
Yes.
But I also believe that we would have found that right place, right time, because we were a little pretty driven
Yeah.
people. I mean, you've got you're writing a textbook on Airway. Anyone that wants to write a textbook is a highly driven and maybe a little bit crazy person, because it's a big undertaking. You
Well,
can
I mean,
collaborate with a lot of people and everything, but I think I do think that it's just wonderful that you're going to do this, because it's going to provide some really great answers to the people that need that level, need that type of learning. That method of learning is so important. To read it and think about it and cogitate, and then to take a course and discuss it, and then to see it in action, and then to do it independently and to see the results, this whole process, it's going to take some time, and we've got work cut out for us. But
yeah, I mean,
I'm excited
I
about it.
think, yeah, and thank you, Rich. So I think, more than anything, I think what the AMR does is it doesn't tell you to do it anyway. It just really challenges our thinking and asking different questions. And my experience has been over the last now 15 years doing this, and I've learned along the way, um, you know, um, I've learned I haven't learned really how to teach it. I mean, I think I've gotten better, but because it's complicated. But I think at the end of the
Uh,
day, it's really about thinking about it differently.
Right.
And what I've learned is that it was really the way we were trained
Hmm.
and how we're taught that is the biggest obstacle. As Sidney Burwell, the dean of Harvard, said, don't let your education get in the way of your learning. And that's so true. And what the AMR does is it really says, and you've been through it. It's kind of like, there's a lot of skepticism. You come in, I've been doing this for a long time, and all of a sudden, after whatever number of days, you start really looking and going, wow. And honestly, there have been very few people who I know that have gone through who haven't said, wow, I mean, that it's like I can't not see it anymore. I see it
Wonderful.
everywhere. And you know why? Because it's personal usually. It's either
Yes.
yourself, your
Yep.
spouse,
Yep.
your kid, so you can ignore it in good
Yep.
consciousness. And I
Yep.
think that's kind of the beginning of the airway journey, is
Hmm.
that, if you have straight teeth and you're trying to fix crooked teeth, it'd be very easy to not really have skin in the game because it's not really your problem. You make a living fixing other people's problems. But when you start realizing that you may have the problem or your spouse or your family, it really kind of pulls you in and you start paying a little bit more attention. And when you realize it's population wide, it's all your patients almost, that you have to really think about seeing things a little differently. And honestly, I think that's the exciting thing, that it puts the thinking back in. I get up every day, really looking forward to the stories that you were just saying. In the green room, we're talking about how, these patients are coming into the woodwork and they're asking questions. And you know why? Because it's the way you see it now, and you're communicating it differently. Those same patients
Right.
that you may have seen for years, all of a sudden you're connecting the dots, and that's the exciting part of it. It's not that we were doing things wrong before, it's just that it's a different way, airway focused way of looking at it. And so that's what I'm excited about. And I'm really very excited that I'm, doing this with you, as I
Me
said,
too.
and
Me too.
and we'll
Yep.
continue. And the purpose of these podcasts is we're speaking to our colleagues out there because we want them to come in and join us and help us teach and spread the
Yep.
word. But either which way, it's going to happen. This isn't the latest and the greatest. People who say that, they just don't understand it
Hmm.
until they do. And when you do, you know that this is the future, and it's going to be a challenge, but we're up for it, aren't we?
Oh, absolutely. I'm totally up for it. Fully committed. It's like I'm starting over, and if it's great, it's
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah. Wow. Thanks, Mark, for.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Thank you,
I mean,
Rich.
we could go on, and
Yes,
we
yes,
will.
yes.
We'll have another great podcast in 1 week.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. Any final words?
No, I think that's great. Went a little long this time, but I think it was good. And thanks for your very cogent questions and continuing the conversation. And we'll wait till next week. So
Great.
signing off. I'll see you
Signing
later.
off.
Take care,
I'll see you
Rich.
guys.
See
Bye.
ya.